If you knew me before, you wouldn't even look my way.
And welcome back to Sullivan's Unheard Voices. I'm here with Cynthia. Cynthia, we met through the FBI.
Yeah.
But then you were telling me about this place, Impact Behavioral Health, right?
Yeah,
That's right,
yeah.
right? And what you've got going on here is like, I have to talk to you about this place.
Yeah.
How did this idea come up?
Yeah. Well, okay. So we'll back up a bit.
Yeah.
FBI is in like Funky Beats Initiative.
Funky Beats Initiative, yes.
band.
That's a good clarification, right? Because we don't want people thinking you're actually working for the FBI.
I know.
Right.
I know. I was like, oh man. But yeah. So this would probably go in like too much of a rabbit trail, so we won't get too far into my story. Another podcast
There's
for another
no
time.
such thing as a rabbit hole in this podcast.
Yes. Well,
So-
I kind of want to try to keep it on a,
I get you.
more of an, what do I want to say? Not professional, but more.
About the impact therapy instead of, I get
And
what
the
you're saying.
ketamine and
Yeah.
psychedelics and trauma and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. So, long story short, I had my own experience with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, or CAP, K-A-P.
Okay.
You'll see it, this is CAP. I had been on SSRIs for 30-some years.
Yeah.
Now, treatment-resistant depression is basically if somebody's tried 2 or more medications and they unsuccessfully can't manage their depression symptoms. That's
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's treatment-resistant depression.
Yeah.
Okay? So I had treatment-resistant depression my whole life, and of course I'd been in the counseling field and mental health and learning more about stuff, right?
Yeah.
As we do, right? Through experience and training. And I had a whole set of circumstances in my life where I just hit a rock bottom. I got incredibly depressed. It was like a perfect storm of all these things came together. And I actually took a year off from work. And I got connected to kind of psychedelic therapy in my own life. What was the most reasonable for me was ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. So I went through an intensive 6-week ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, outpatient, and that actually completely changed my life and like super eye-opening. So I was able to...
Can we pause for a second and kind of go back for a little bit? What was the tipping point, right? Because a lot of people are maybe hesitant to sort of go to that ketamine therapy. Like, what was it about ketamine therapy that you said, as somebody that's a professional in this sort of realm, like, I'm going to go for it?
Yeah, well, I couldn't figure out me. So one thing because I'm a clinical supervisor, right? I've been in this field for over 10 years, and I've worked in all facets of this field, and I couldn't get me. And one thing that I train on is the more work you do on yourself, the better you're going to be at mental health, right? Because and we all start off as like little baby clinicians, and then we just learn and grow, and you have to be willing to stretch yourself, and it's not easy. I mean, it's just not. I mean, a lot of people burn out of this field, and I get it, no hard feelings. I totally understand. I had hit that point. For me, the tipping point was the chronic suicidal ideations. Okay. And so when we talk about suicidality, we're talking about, a lot of people say, well, I thought about hurting myself, but they don't really have a plan. They don't really have an intent, but they really feel like they want to die. I mean, I think we've all been there to some degree. I think that's a normal human experience, and I think we need
I would agree.
We need to normalize it more than pathologize it. However, for me, I actually had a plan. I had an intent. I mean, it was getting really bad, right? Like, it was just a very, very dark place. And so I luckily have an amazing husband who reached out to my close friends, very close friends, and they kind of took turns coming over when he couldn't be there. And one of my friends introduced me. She helped me find a counselor in Portland who was really good. And she was doing psychedelic-assisted therapy, psilocybin, ketamine, MDMA. MDMA is not legal, but there's still the training for it because it's trying to be pushed through the federal
Right, you
government.
still have the clinical trials and all that piece, yeah.
Yeah, well, it made it past that, but the FDA, yeah, there's a whole thing with the FDA and whatnot. But anyway, so I went and I had that ketamine intensive therapy done, and it was such a different experience. It brought me to myself. Now I do microdose ketamine at home. So they have troches, these little things you can get at the compounding agency, compounding clinic.
Pharmacy?
Yeah, pharmacy. And it's actually pretty cheap. And so I microdose it. I don't go on these huge ketamine trips. I use it as needed. And I went off of SSRIs, and, you know, it's not addictive, and I can take it as needed, and it doesn't last very long. And, you know, I wouldn't drive while I take it, but I can like, clean the kitchen or, you know, that kind of thing. So that, to answer your question, was the tipping point. Now, I'll back up. I did get on Cymbalta, the lowest dose of Cymbalta, because it helps with chronic nerve pain. And I have a rare genetic condition that causes a lot of chronic pain, and it does help. But I'm not taking it for the mental health benefit.
Yeah.
That's the cool thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not enslaved anymore to SSRIs. And I don't have an issue with medications, right? To be very clear.
Yeah.
But they work for about 47% of the population.
And they still haven't quite figured out why, right?
Yeah, I mean, you've got your SSRIs and your SSNRIs or something. Cymbalta's in that SSNRI or whatever. Anyway, they basically target, I mean, you know, I'm not medically trained. I get the gist of it, right?
Yeah.
Basically, they target like norepinephrine and dopamine and serotonin receptors, right? The happy chemicals in our brain. And ketamine actually does something different than that.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk through that, though. So, like, what can somebody expect? Because, like, when you think of ketamine, right, the first thing you think of is horse tranquilizer.
Yeah.
Right?
Or going in a K-hole at a party.
Right. Or But it's not that, right? It's completely different. And I want people to sort of understand that.
That's where, and you've got like Matthew Perry and, you know, Elon Musk talked about using ketamine. He didn't go into specifics that I know of, but we know Matthew Perry died tragically, right? Like, you know, and okay. But those doctors were committing incredible malpractice.
Yeah.
We know that too, right?
Because it has to be guided.
It should be. They're not always.
Okay.
So there's some different ways. Let's try to break this down and see if my brain can remember everything. Okay, so there's the way to take it intravenously, right? That's more medical. There's a lot of these clinics popping up, you know, throughout these. You can go in and get like an IV infusion of ketamine, like a drip. A lot of times I don't see where that's guided.
That's intense.
It is, and I don't think it's best practice, but I do think that if it's going to bring relief to people, that's still better. Like if you're in a storm and you don't know how to get out, if you can go in, even if it's not guided, and get some IV ketamine treatment.
And if that keeps you alive, it's worth it.
It keeps you alive and gets you out of the storm long enough to get some traction, so be it. So there's that way. The way that I do it is the best practice, where I was trained and I went through an intensive program for a year through Integrative Psychiatric Institute on the use of MDMA, ketamine, and psilocybin therapeutically. So the way that I do it is prescribed through a prescriber, and it's a fluid that the person swishes and they spit it out, and then they can actually up the dose in 15 to 20 minutes if they want to for a more intensive journey. It just depends on the person.
Yeah.
What I have to do is take their blood pressure before and after. If your blood pressure is too high, you're not going to be a good candidate for that. But that's really what I do, and that's where it's guided, right? That's the only kind I will do, personally.
And then when you're talking about guided, that means like you're talking your patient through it. You're there to support. You're there to sort of work through whatever issues pop up as a result of this experience.
Yeah, and it's different because it's not really a psychedelic, it's a dissociative.
Okay.
Is what
What's
ketamine
the difference?
So psychedelic is going to be like, you know, it's like your, gosh, I don't even know how to explain this. It's like you're not on. I'm not going to explain this well, I don't think, because I'm not pulling up clinical terms. But on ketamine, basically, you're not necessarily, God, I don't know how to describe this, Sullivan. Give me a minute to think about it. Give me a second to think about it, because I can't pull up the words, but I love the question. Just we'll table it and come back to it.
Yeah,
okay.
please.
Yeah.
And so, like, with your traditional session, is it like an hour long, or is it
An hour to 2 hours, it depends, because ketamine kind of goes like this and then, kind of down. And you want to make sure, because they can't drive afterwards. They need somebody to drive them. But it kind of gets intense, and so I'm there because what it does is it connects us to our somatic.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe this might be helpful to understand. This is why I do what I do. Okay, so let's look at what is trauma.
Okay.
What is trauma, right? We talk about traumatic incidences, right?
Yeah.
But then not everybody has PTSD or stress from a traumatic incident.
Right.
They don't. And we're like, well, why is that? Well, they're more resilient. Why are they more resilient? Okay, well, what we find out is we are attachment beings from birth, right?
Okay.
Now, say your parents get divorced. That could be a traumatic incident, but that's not the problem. Because if you say your parents get divorced and it was hard and it was traumatic, but your parents were attuning well enough to your needs and your expression of grief, anger, whatever, right?
And they're co-parenting effectively, and they have like the children's interest in heart and all that kind of stuff.
Right. They can kind of put themselves aside, essentially, right? And attune to the child the way the child needs to be attuned to. That might not be a traumatic incident, right? And so what ends up happening in order to get our needs met, right, when we're little, okay, little, and I don't say this to blame parents. I say this as more of to understand how intergenerational trauma works. We only parent to the ability that we were parented.
Oh, 100%. My dad is a walking example of that.
All of us are. All of our parents are. I mean, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you're growing up, and let's say, I'm just using this as an example. Let's say you have a really anxious mom, just a really good mom, but super anxious, right?
Yeah.
Well, okay, in that anxiety, the child's needs, if the child is bringing on more anxiety for the parent, right? Right? So say the kid's like, mom, and what's the child going to do? Ooh, in order to survive, I have to attach, right? So what am I going to do? Ooh, the message to the child is, I'm too much for my mom, or whatever, right? Internal narrative happens, but it becomes hardwired in our autonomic nervous system. Like the body keeps the score, okay? We become hardwired, okay? So let's say we get hardwired in this kind of state of, in my case, it was depression. Depression to me, and I don't know, barring any medical illnesses or like a traumatic brain injury, I do not believe that people are just depressed or anxious. I believe that it is absolutely, more often than not, connected to a internally wired system within our autonomic nervous system of fight, flight, or freeze.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because one of the things that I've noticed, especially in the autism circles that I run into, anxiety disorder is very prevalent, and so is depression. Like, those are the two main co-occurring conditions with autism. And I think they're combined, right? They're connected intrinsically. You can't separate them.
You can't.
Yeah.
And well, let's look at why. So I have a child who is on the spectrum that's an adult now. But let's look at why. Okay, so you have somebody on the spectrum, right? Mm-hmm. Their needs are different. Yeah. I'm not saying wrong. I'm just saying maybe they're just not the same needs, right? Like, why is my baby changing overnight, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
Right? They can't express authentically. That's the problem. So you've got a little kiddo with autism, and maybe they're doing the hand flapping, or maybe they're whatever they're doing that's different, right? And they're being told, stop expressing who you are.
Yeah.
Stop it, whether it's at school, at home, whatever. And it's not because people are being cruel per se, right? Some people are, but not everybody. Like, I don't want my kid to look weird, so stop it.
Yeah.
Right? Well, if you can't express yourself authentically, right, what happens? You disconnect from yourself.
Yeah. It's really hard for you to figure out who you are if you're being told not to be you every day. How interesting.
That's what psychedelics do. They bring us back to us. The way that I word it, it's like authentic expression. The way I word it, because it's just my experience, is my consciousness became alive. So think about your gut. Okay,
Yeah.
we all have a gut intuition. That's
Yeah.
us, right? Our gut is us. Okay, so what do we do oftentimes with little kids? Like, say they don't want to give somebody a hug. Just give them a hug, give them a hug. Sometimes their gut's saying no. And we learn to dismiss our guts very early on in life, most people. We don't have a society, an agrarian society, where we're primal and living off the fat of the land anymore, because you try to survive in the jungle with your intellect alone. Good
Yeah.
luck.
Good luck.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's us, right? So for me, my consciousness, I connected with me on the deepest levels, but that also meant some really horrendously shitty somatic expression. Some of it, I believe, was preverbal trauma or neurodevelopmental trauma, where I didn't have memories or words to connect with what was happening,
Yeah.
but it was still trapped, and it has to be expressed.
Interesting.
In order for it to be right, I'm talking expressed in a safe environment, in a safe way, and then it's gone.
Because one of the things that's bothered me my entire life is
Yeah.
that I don't remember anything before the age of 16. Like, mentally, I just blocked it all out because of all the trauma and all of the other stuff that was going on at the time.
Yeah, so probably a freeze state, more than likely.
Yeah.
That's what freeze is. So when you think about fight, flight, freeze, I know people include fawn, but that's not primal, because
Yeah.
fawn happens as a result of,
It's conditional, right?
well, it's like if a bear jumps out in front of you, you're going to
Yeah.
run, you're going to fight, or you're just going to
Yeah.
freeze. You're not going to go, "Hi, Mr. Bear, how can I help you?" Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The fawn is a little bit more of an advanced response.
Yeah.
Right.
Because that's how I respond now, right? I know that about me. If I'm in a highly emotional state or in a condition and I want to just leave the conversation, I will tell the person whatever they want to hear, just so I can leave that situation.
Right.
And I know that's not healthy.
But
At the same time, that's my survival mechanism that I've learned over the years.
Yeah, yeah. But you think about, because I am 110% convinced I was mainly wired in a functional free state.
Yeah.
My autonomic nervous system until, psychedelic therapy. And I say that because for me now, yeah, I got some patchy memories, probably not to the point what you're talking about, but when we go into a free state, okay, when we go into a free state, the body actually starts to set off painkiller, like natural opioids
Oh, interesting.
in our brain, and we can dissociate and leave. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you think about, because we're mammals. We're mammals. So this is what mammals do. You watch the little gazelle across the Serengeti plain getting chased by a lion,
Yeah.
right? And it gets away, right? What does it do? When it runs and it knows it's in safety, it does that, like it shakes off. That's a somatic. It's releasing that somatic. It doesn't over intellectualize it and compartmentalize it and pretend it didn't happen, like humans, right? Now, say the gazelle gets caught, it'll fight. You'll see it fight,
Yeah.
right? You see it try to flee, doesn't work. It'll fight, and if that doesn't work, what does it do? Freeze, and it starts to dissociate. And so, if it does say get away from the lion in that state, and it gets up and it flees and goes to safety, then the circle is completed of, I'm going to put it like, it's safe again, and it shakes off that. Because have you ever been really scared, or like you slip on the ice and you kind of shake?
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
That's good. A lot of people get really embarrassed and they kind of, no, that's actually the body going like,
Yeah.
we need this out of our system. Otherwise, it becomes trapped in our autonomic nervous system. Think of all those years of that being trapped. And
it gets pent up too, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, yeah.
yeah,
How interesting. Okay.
yeah. And we get more and more disconnected from ourselves when that happens, right? We get more and more disconnected from ourselves, and then we wake up one day and we're like, who am I?
Yeah.
What's happening?
Yeah.
I don't know why can't I just be me?
I remember I went through that at the time, because because I wasn't diagnosed until I was 37.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah.
so I just knew I was weird. I knew I was different.
Yeah.
I couldn't put a name on it. And
Yeah.
then once that label was available to me and I could kind of finally understand, like, it was both a huge sigh of relief, but also panic inducing, because it's like, well, did I know myself at all my entire life? Mm-hmm. And that sort of spun me into a mental funk that I've never experienced.
Yeah, it's
before.
like a new identity for you.
Yeah.
You're like, what? My baseline's changed.
And I had to rewire everything, like every conversation and all that stuff. It was so exhausting.
Well, I think neurodivergence is really actually much more common.
I think so too.
We see a lot of ADHD and like autism in families,
Yeah.
right? So I was like the quintessential ADHD kid. I was bouncing off the walls. I presented very male-like as far as like fighting and just,
Yeah.
I wasn't the typical girl. But, now I look at it and it's like, one of my kids who is on the spectrum's like, Mom, you got the autism, right? And I don't care at this, but for me, I don't care. It's not whether I do or don't isn't an issue for me.
Yeah, and it's an individualized journey. Not everybody needs that.
Right.
And that has to be okay too.
Right.
Yeah.
It does. But sometimes we need to know what's going on. Like you're talking about, I just knew I was different.
Yeah.
Like we need to know, why was I different? What was going on?
Yeah, like why couldn't I keep a job for more than 12 months? Like that was almost impossible.
Yeah.
Almost impossible.
Yeah.
And like I didn't realize I was getting into sensory overload. And
Yes.
then like I start making mistakes and it's a cycle that repeats itself. But now that I know I'm autistic, I also know what my sensory overload indicators
Right.
are. And I can work to making sure that never happens again.
Yeah.
But if it weren't for my therapist and all of the work, I don't know how far I would have progressed.
Right.
Because it takes a lot of work.
It does. And I get the whole overstimulation thing too.
Yeah.
And I kind of lean towards, and I'm not sure because we just don't know enough yet, I don't think. But I kind of lean towards, again, ADHD and autism. While there is a genetic component, obviously, more than likely, right? Because we've got epigenetics that
Yeah.
turn on essentially, throughout our different experiences in life. But when you think about attention deficit, for example, and even with autism to a point, right? You're thinking about what happens if a child isn't being attuned to, and say they're in an environment where, like, for example, like what if I just stood up and backed you into a corner and I started screaming at you and calling you names and you couldn't leave? What would you do?
There's not much to do.
Yeah, you just
Yeah.
tune out, right?
Yep.
You just
Yeah.
tune out.
Yeah.
And that can become hardwired. You know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah, I
it's
do.
like this. It's kind of hard because we don't really know. I don't think, but
Yeah.
because there's a lot of factors that play. But it's good that you finally got some answers because, right, getting to who you are authentically, that's so important. And authentically, you're somebody with neurodivergence,
Yeah.
and that's awesome. And to embrace that.
And I know that I'm lucky that I can.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people can be verbally or vocal about the fact that they're on the spectrum because sometimes it has dire consequences when you disclose.
It can. What kind of consequences? Like in what situations? I mean, like I know military, for example.
Well, a prime
Sure.
example is dating, right?
Oh.
So every woman I have ever told I was autistic to, not interested.
Really?
Yeah, that's the big turnoff, just like that. The minute they found out you're autistic, it's with very few exceptions, without any curiosity, without any questions, without any further conversation. The minute I disclose, it's ghost. That happens time and time and time again.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you, the world is a cruel place. And
Yeah.
in order to authentically express ourselves, we have to prepare not to be liked
Yeah.
and to be rejected.
And be okay with it.
Yeah.
Which is it was the hardest thing for me.
Well, right, because we're actually being vulnerable,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And when were we hurt the most as children? When we were vulnerable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why we have all these mandatory reporting laws in place, because it's for the vulnerable people, right? Because they can be taken advantage of. But yeah, I forgot what I was saying. We're talking about ADHD and neurodivergence. Where was I going with this?
We're talking sort of like about the genetic aspect of it, and
Yeah.
and how like
Man.
we don't really know the cause or the roots, but it
Oh,
is.
right. Thank you. No,
Yeah.
it got me back on track. So, you're talking about how people or women aren't curious, or they're just not going to,
Yeah.
oh, I have autism. Ugh, that's the thing, right? Like, you have learned to be rejected for authentically expressing who you are.
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
Yeah.
And the world is a hurtful, hurtful place. And a part of my journey, when I did a group psilocybin journey for my certification down in Eugene, I was with a group of people I didn't know, but we were all clinicians to some degree or another, some doctors, some
Yeah.
counselors, some social workers, whatever. All I did was cry. I cried for like 4.5 hours straight. I just sobbed, and the people around me were sobbing. There were other things that happened, but I realized it was like this suppression of I was just like, I hate this world. It is so cruel. It's so cruel. It's, and that was really suppressed in me, is the cruelty of not just what happened to me, but to people, right?
In general, yeah.
What you're talking about, like, how superficial to be like, well, I have autism. Oh, okay, I was interested, but now I'm not,
Yeah.
It's cruel.
Because I haven't changed anything about me from this moment until this moment, except for I used a word.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild. I don't understand it, but
But we don't,
yeah.
I mean, like, I think you're an exception. There are people like Claude, who I introduced you to. I
Yeah.
always say he's the mean CEO because I like to be funny, and ironic, because he's the farthest thing from mean.
Yeah.
Right? There are genuine people in this world. There really are. There are
Yeah.
good people in this world. But I would say overall, it's not the majority. People just aren't safe emotionally. And we don't like authentic expression, especially of emotion.
It's weird because I think that part of that is also generational, right?
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, because like I remember like growing up,
Yeah.
like my dad would always say like we're men, we don't cry, we're
Yeah.
this and that, we're this and that, and so it was always just like you don't show or convey emotion as a dude.
Right.
And
right.
It's like that's so unhealthy, Dad.
Oh, I know.
so unhealthy.
But when you think about like the boomer generation or the great generation, right?
Oh yeah, his dad was
Right.
real abusive son of a gun.
Yeah,
And
but
what my dad had to endure.
Yeah.
And like if you were to compare my dad and my grandpa, my dad's a saint
yep.
compared to my grandpa.
Yep.
And we do the best we can with the knowledge that we have.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's societal to some large degree, right?
Oh, interesting.
Because you have to think about when we talk about mental health and we
Yeah.
talk about even diagnosing people from the DSM, it really has to do with who's in the room. Like if you have diabetes, you have diabetes. It doesn't matter who's in the room.
Yeah.
But
interesting.
do you know what I mean? I kind of think, my little take, I think it's kind of emotional eugenics, but we don't need to go down that road.
Yeah.
We have to diagnose in order to get payment from insurance. We have to be ethical about it, and everybody has something in the DSM, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Everybody does. That's just, we pathologize people way too much.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, because once you have that label, then all of a sudden that's your label.
Right.
And it's like that. No, I'm a human. I just happen to have this sort of condition. Like you wouldn't say
Right.
that with somebody who lost a limb, right?
Yeah. Yeah, right, exactly. And it's like, you're talking about your dad or intergenerational traumas and things, right? Like, so his parents, right? They're in a time, a place of World War I, or the build up to World War I. They're, World War II, right? And the boomers, they come, their parents come back from war, and we've got the baby boom, right? And everybody had just gone through the Great Depression, a lot of death, a lot of destruction, a lot of just crap. And we all, like back then, right, America wanted prosperity and hope and good things. And we're not going to talk about bad things because we're done talking about bad things, and that has carried.
But it comes at a cost.
Oh, absolutely.
When you ignore the bad, it comes at a cost.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if I want to circle back to the ketamine.
Yeah, the
therapy,
ketamine. I know we've kind of got off track. Thank you.
It happens with this podcast, and that's okay because I love it when that does happen. So like when you're going through that process and you're getting in touch with your authentic self, Do you mind sort of talking about your journey?
No, I could.
through
I'll
your
talk about
experience?
a little bit. Sure. So for me, it starts with, and again, this goes into a whole nother thing, right? I was adopted when I was a young baby, and oftentimes adoption in the United States is used for family building. It's not actually used, like we don't value family preservation.
Yeah.
So, we've got foster care adoptions. That's different. I mean, right? It's meaning when I say foster care, I'm talking about children who are removed from the care of their caregivers because of danger or something like that, right?
Yeah.
That wasn't my case. My biological parents wanted me, and I was part of the tail end of the baby scoop era in America. And this has happened in Australia and Canada. And they actually put laws in place, but we didn't, to prevent that from happening. But there were a lot of people, like the unwed mothers sent to homes and shamed.
Yeah.
They wanted their babies. And so instead of valuing family preservation, right, and how do we help families stay together, I'm not saying that's always going to happen. But then, because in order to explain my story, people have to understand the layers to adoption. We have a society that loves adoption. I grew up, not my adopted parents did not say this to me, but in general, people would say, "Aren't you glad you weren't aborted? Aren't you grateful for being adopted?" And
It's very gaslighty.
And then my medical records, all of my records are completely sealed, like a second-class citizen. So I didn't know a lot of us don't have access to our birth records. And then society says, well, you should just be grateful that you weren't born in a dumpster. But they don't know that there's different types of adoptions. And they don't understand that adopting somebody does not cure your infertility.
Yeah.
So what happens when somebody's infertile and they just can't get pregnant? You can adopt. But that gives the child a job. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that everybody who's had infertility that's adopted is a terrible adopted parent. There are some that are trauma-informed, but the trauma information around adoption was not there, especially with my parents. And I think they really did do their level best. So, I don't hold ill will against them.
Yeah.
Right? I love them. They're my parents. And I can hold these very two dichotomous things, right?
Yeah, because they're not mutually exclusive. They can exist at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That both it was wrong. Not them. They didn't do anything wrong, right? They went
Yeah.
through the legal channels.
Yeah.
But it was wrong that my biological parents wanted to keep me, and they could have, and they were shamed and coerced into relinquishing me by the LA County of Adoptions. And my parents did the best that they could, and so I go into a family, I don't look like anybody, I don't act like anybody, I'm just, right? Their heritage is not my heritage. I used to say, and I thought I was an alien.
Yeah.
I used to say that for years, even to my young adulthood. I'm like, I don't have a lineage. And people are like, oh, well, I wish I was adopted. Okay, even if your lineage is crap, that's part of who we are as people, right? That's, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Come on. So all that to say, I had spent years and years and years trying to fit in, and I didn't know who I was. I mean, I did reunite with my biological parents. That didn't so much work out, but whatever. I found some other siblings, and we've got relationships to some degree. But, who am I? Right? Who am I? I don't have genetic mirroring.
Right.
I didn't know. And so there was this lifetime of suppression, and I'm a weird person. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, I say weird in a good way, right? Like, we're all kind of weird, I think. I'm creative. I'm flamboyant. I'm extra. I can be professional. There's so many sides to me like there are to other people. And God bless my family. A lot of that was more of a hassle to them because they didn't get it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
there was just so much unknown for me. And so and then you also have to think too, I was taken away from my biological mother right out the gate. I didn't get I didn't get the oxytocin.
Oh yeah.
I was actually put into foster care and held for a period of time, which is silly. Then I was actually dropped when I was there, and they called my adopted mom like I was merchandise and said, "Do you still want her?" Yeah, but this is not uncommon in adoption. I don't think in private infant adoptions this is not uncommon, even now.
Even now, like
Yeah.
they do.
I know. We could do a whole podcast on that.
Wow.
And I've got a lot of other adoptees that would be happy to do it too. But
Yeah.
anyway, so what that ended up doing for me and not understanding, not as I was always trying to get help, right? I've been in counseling since I was a kid. And I was pro counseling, right? Even before I got into this field. And stuff worked, stuff was helpful, but nothing ever quite got it, And
Yeah.
it wasn't until I really did the psychedelics kind of push you into, like, the best way to have a bad trip is to fight it. That's a bad trip, right? You fight it. Is to go into the fear, right? And you feel the pain, but you don't know the totality of the situation until you know both the good and the bad, right? So I'm sitting in all of this pain and this somatic stuff rising up, right? And some of it made no sense. There was one instance with the intensive ketamine where I just shook uncontrollably. I leaned into this fear. I had no idea what the fear was. I leaned into it and I just shook for about 20, 30 minutes, completely uncontrollably. My husband was there and then the clinician was there. And he was just like, yeah, this is kind of like the way I think of it as is that gazelle being chased.
Yeah.
That was like, 30 years of being chased or something all coming off of me at once. Maybe pre-verbal trauma. Maybe it was being separated and going into that foster care. I don't know. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was like all these different somatic expressions. But when I went through that instance where I was shaking, and I mean, it was really wild. I went to bed that night, whatever, and I was like, what the heck was that? I felt so good and so regulated after that. Like, I don't know. It was like, and I don't know what it was from, but it was like I felt completely like a different, I was just lighter. It was amazing. And it was the same thing when I did the group psilocybin, right? It was really hard. I mean, even that day afterwards, I would text one of my friends and I'm like, this sucks. Like, I hate my life. This sucks. I'm still depressed. But after I slept and after I had a few hours to reset, I was at so much peace.
Yeah.
I felt regulated. I felt good. I went paddleboarding by myself. And I was just like, if I could feel like this every day, this is what it means to be whole, if you will.
And I can only imagine how many people out there right now that could benefit from that experience. Because like I can think of like numerous people off the top of my head that having a good day is rare.
Yeah.
Just because of everything they've got going on right now. And just how beneficial something like that would be for them.
Yeah. I think so too. And it's not really affordable.
Yeah.
Now, like Oregon Health Plan Medicaid, they will pay for certain types of ketamine, right? So like the nasal, the S-ketamine, it's a little bit different. And it's still ketamine, but they've changed it a little bit more in the pharmaceutical company.
Yeah.
But it's...
As they always do.
Right, same, relatively same effect. And they will pay for the intravenous, like the IV, right? But otherwise, insurance doesn't cover this.
Yeah.
So I've got clients coming in, paying cash so they can do a ketamine journey.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. I paid $600 a month or $600 a week for 6 weeks.
But at the same time, it's worth every penny.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change it at all.
Yeah.
Because I learned a lot.
He's like, last year I switched insurance companies. And my mental health provider was not on the insurance. And so, like, I was not about to lose them. So I was like, I'm private paying. Like, that was an expensive year last year. And I switched back this year, so it's now covered. But, like, sometimes if you have the means, it's worth it.
It is. And
Yeah.
like psilocybin, from mushrooms, like, first off, why can't we just have mushrooms? Come on. I wonder what our founding fathers would say. They'd be like, oh, you can't grow mushrooms that naturally grow on every continent, but I think like Antarctica? Quit it. Right? Like, and psilocybin's very inexpensive to make, but the dispensaries are making hand over fist. It's very expensive. I could be a facilitator. I now have the training.
Yeah.
I could go to OHA, Oregon Health Authority, and fork out the 10 grand or whatever it is to become one. Like, okay, who's going to do that? You know what I mean? And then you go to the psilocybin dispensary, and that's jacked up pricing when we could just do this very cheaply. And I understand you want to have some kind of a monitoring system. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have a problem with that, or trainings, or even having the psilocybin tested and, having that be a little bit more expensive. Like, I can understand that, right? But
When it's a cash grab, it's a cash grab.
it is.
Yeah.
It is. And it's like there's so much value in it. And microdosing psilocybin.
It's one of those underrated things, right? Like, because I've been down that journey of psilocybin before.
Oh, have you?
Yeah, and the microdosing psilocybin journey it changed my life.
Oh, wow. Good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It was because, like you were saying, like you're not in tune to a lot of parts of your own person until you go on a journey, and that journey is like. It was life-changing in the fact that it allowed me the opportunity to go places that I couldn't go before
Yes.
and be logical about the experience. Like, it allowed me to think about it if it wasn't for that psilocybin journey, I don't think I would have been able to forgive my father for all of his past transgressions.
Wow. Yeah.
Because I didn't realize, until that moment, and I started thinking about, like, what would I do if I was in his situation? And I don't know if I would have done any better.
Exactly.
And it's like, how can I hold him account
Exactly.
for his behavior when, as messed up as it was, he was still trying his best?
And like you said, it was still better than his father.
Yeah. I never had to worry about a meal, and I never had to worry about a roof over my head.
Yeah, but that's the thing, right? That's intergenerational trauma, is recognizing that. And I love that part of your story because it kind of forces us, right, to start reckoning with these things. And it's really, uncomfortable is not even a strong enough word.
Yeah.
But it brings us to wholeness, right? It brings us to ourselves.
And if I were to try to do that without the psilocybin to sort of help guide it, it would have been a much more complicated process.
Yep.
Because I wouldn't have even thought about it. But it was like the ability to just let go. And the other unintended consequence, too, from psilocybin for me, which I thought was just, I had no idea, it lessened my my sensory limits.
Interesting. Well, I've noticed it goes in, and now I know why it's called a sacred mushroom, or sacred medicine, because it knows what needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
It like prioritizes, like, let's dial this back, or let's turn this one up, because you've been ignoring this your whole life, or you're not aware of it. It's so interesting. It is really sacred, and because I'm not into the woo-woo stuff. I think it's there, and I believe in it. I just don't know exactly what I believe. But I'll tell you, I've had experiences as somebody stone cold sober with other people in their journeys, and something metaphysical happens.
Yeah.
So there's something. I don't know what. And in my own experience, right, like I remember thinking at one point between sobs, like, oh, this is why people believe in past lives. Now, I didn't say it like I wasn't like, I don't believe in that necessarily. It doesn't resonate with me. But it was just this weird peek, this window into like, and since that, I bring it up because it's like, since then, I'm like, well, authentically, right? I've been searching, like, what do I believe? Who am I? I think that existential stuff is kind of lifelong.
Yeah.
And the medicine knew that.
Yeah. And I'm a firm believer in that now. Like, I was not open to that until I moved to Kaiser, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. When I got to Kaiser, I was leaving a really bad situation, and I just left my heart open for the first time, I think, in my entire life, and just stuff has been happening since I've been in Kaiser that I can't explain, that is no coincidence, and like all of these connections, these pieces that are all fitting into place, and I have learned to relinquish control, and like I'm just along for the ride on this one.
Yep.
Because something else is steering. I don't know what it is. I don't know if I ever will, but there's something out there steering
There's
this
a
bus.
different thing, right? There's another. We know there's different dimensions, right? We know that for sure. Science says so. But like, you know, I find it interesting because in my training that I took, they really hammered the metaphysical. Yeah. And no, there was no one direction. It wasn't like you got to believe in Buddha or you got to do the. It was like, look, if you're an atheist, and I be honest, I don't really know much about atheism. I don't exactly know how to define it. But if you just don't believe in anything at all, spiritually or metaphysically, you're going to have to start exploring that, because your clients are, and there are metaphysical, spiritual experiences that happen with psychedelics that you've got to be open to. Yeah. You know, and I found that to be astounding. Like, I was just floored that here we are having this in our training. I'm like, whoa, but it's true. Yeah. It's true.
And the fact that the reason it's only illegal was such a weird, strange story to begin with. You know, it's just like, I don't understand how we got there, but...
Well, we got there with marijuana, and right? We got the DARE propaganda, and we've got. I mean, there's this Michael Pollan who does a lot of work around psychedelics. He has, I can't remember the name of the Netflix series, but there's a Netflix series he does on psychedelic medicine. Okay. And you know, one thing that was pointed out is how, you know, LSD and psychedelics were becoming really popular, like in the 60s, in the 70s in the Vietnam War. And people were actively, like, kind of, like, protesting, and it was a pretty tumultuous time in our nation, right? And they're kind of like, well, were people actually doing psychedelics and breaking away from their intergenerational raisings and kind of like, you know what I mean? Like coming back to themselves and authentically expressing. You know what I mean? Like, I do. And then you had, what's his face, Nixon, that put the kibosh to all of that. And then this whole propaganda thing started. I mean, the marijuana propaganda was before that, but, and we're still there.
And the marijuana propaganda, do you know the history behind that one?
I don't remember it, but I'm sure I've heard it.
The only reason marijuana is illegal is because the big paper industry. So around the time that they created this something called the I can't remember the name of it. There was something that they came up with a process to make paper out of hemp. And it was cheaper, more reliable.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've heard this, but I didn't know this was actually the catalyst.
Yeah, this was the catalyst. The big paper industry got a hold and heard of this thing. And so all of a sudden, the people who were in charge of paper started this ad campaign tying people from Mexico to marijuana, because marijuana wasn't even called marijuana. They created that name, marijuana, so it was an evil term, so that hemp paper couldn't get them out of business.
Reefer madness. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That I've heard this, but I didn't realize it was such a big deal. I mean, but it's, you know, corporate hell, I guess, if you will.
Greed.
You know, it is greed. It is greed. It's like I don't really have a problem with corporations or being, you know.
I'm right there with you. Greed. I'm right there with you.
Yeah, but I have a problem
capitalism.
With
like, I remember I had a political science instructor, and I love him to death. And he said the most amazing thing. He's like, the United States government is the worst government on the planet, except for every other government on the planet.
Yeah, that's true.
We're doing the best we can, and this is the best we got until we can come up with something else. And I'm a firm believer in capitalism. I just don't know why we have billionaires.
Right. Well, I mean, then, you know, you're kind of getting into, like, everything becomes marketable. Everything becomes, everything.
Consumer-based.
Yeah, and even when you get to psychedelics and ketamine. Like, it's not affordable for the average person to do this type of therapy. Sure, there's insurance that will cover, like, so the best practice that I use for ketamine assisted psychotherapy is we have to have like preparation sessions, at least one, but really you have to have like the therapeutic rapport with the client, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I don't know how many sessions that's going to take, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10. I don't know,
Yeah.
but getting to that and understanding the client's needs, right?
Well, because the client has to trust you at some level
Absolutely.
and have that relationship, right?
Absolutely.
Otherwise, the whole journey can go awry.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I get that.
And so then you have a prep session, then you can do the journey. And then after that, you need to have, you know, like within a week-ish or less, the integrative session.
Yeah.
And then wash, rinse, repeat. And then you can go have another journey and then an integrative session, then a journey, you know, as long as you need. And the integrative piece is like, you know, because there's this, after, just like with psilocybin, like with ketamine, there's this accumulative effect, and 2-3 days later, you might go, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right? And you're kind of putting together a puzzle sometimes, and it takes a while. And so that's how I do it here. So insurance will cover like the sessions, right? The prep session, the therapy sessions, even the integrative sessions, but they won't cover the ketamine, right?
Do you think that'll ever change?
I hope. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I tend to be a little more pessimistic. And I'm just pessimistic more so because I don't trust government. Not that there aren't good people that work in government. Not that I'm anti-establishment. It's just, I don't like how the government, like, you know, we should, MDMA should have really been, you know, the VA has been backing MDMA, excuse me, and the FDA should have actually put it through last year.
Yeah.
They didn't. Why? Because Big Pharma's not pushing it.
Yeah.
Right? It's that stuff.
Yeah.
And I just don't know. I don't know because it is so, there is so much corporate greed and whatnot. And the lobbyists, and they have to influence legislation. They don't want us making cheap psilocybin, just growing it and making it cheap, right? They want to make it
Yeah.
and sell it to you. So I don't know. I hope so, because there's some pretty astounding effects of ketamine assisted.
Yeah, and I heard what they just did with the clinical trials too. So that so they had those clinical trials with the VA with soldiers. And they have extended the clinical trial instead of like making it permanent because they had an issue with the number of people on the placebo effect. And I argue it's, I would say, dang near impossible to not know you're on placebo. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, like, what's the point of coming back and participating if you're on the placebo, because you know you're not on mushrooms. And so what I read was that because they didn't have enough of the placebo effect, they have to extend it. And it's like, how do you do a placebo effect with that kind of instance? But that's
interesting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. The VA has backed, a lot of these psychedelic treatments.
It's a game changer. I know so many of my fellow soldiers that have had life-altering experiences because of one instance.
Right.
Like one instance allows them to acknowledge and deal with that traumatic wartime experience.
Yeah, and then you've got like ibogaine and other types of psychedelics that have also been helpful, used usually in other countries for soldiers and stuff, right? But like it blows my mind because the VA doesn't pay for anything, or they don't back anything that doesn't work, that the research doesn't come back astoundingly so that they should pay for it. And when you talk about Republicans and Democrats, both of them have funded the VA trials for the clinical trials for a lot of these. So it's not like it's just one or the other, right? There's, I think we agree more as a
I think as people,
political,
we agree more than we disagree.
I do too.
And they just use those fringe topics to keep us at each other's throats.
Right. It gets all into this dare stuff and the propaganda. And I understand the concerns around ketamine. I do. it's not addictive. It's not physically addictive, no more
Yeah.
than psilocybin. And it actually, the tolerance builds very quickly
Yeah.
with ketamine like it does psilocybin, right?
Yeah.
And so the bad stories are like the Matthew Perry. Well, I mean, the guy had so much money, and these doctors knew that they shouldn't have been selling it to him, right? These doctors are, committed huge malpractice.
Yeah, because he was
Yeah.
injecting like a lot, right? Like
Yeah.
3 or 4 times the recommended dosage.
Yeah,
or something.
something like that. And
Yeah.
it was over the top.
Yeah.
And the doctors should have never, ever. I mean, and, I know that they at some point had the doctors really kind of confessing or found out that maybe it was through text or something. I don't remember exactly. But the doctors admitting that they knew what they were doing. Right? So most people aren't going to be addicted to ketamine. Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean? They're not going to be,
Yeah.
especially if you use it as prescribed and you start seeing the effects of it. You're going to want to keep doing it
Yeah,
the way that you've been doing it.
I get that. At the same time, though, like it's like I remember reading like the amount of mushrooms that you have to consume for it to be fatal. We would have to like eat nothing but mushrooms for like 3 days in a row.
I don't even know, right? Like, I don't even know what I mean, I wouldn't want to see the trip, but
I remember reading there's not
Really?
a single incidence of overdose on mushrooms. Not a single one.
no, and
in recorded history.
Cultures still use them, but
Yeah.
like one thing that I found very interesting is like when America was buying slaves, right, from Africa, they're
Yeah.
taking them away from their culture, right,
Yeah.
stripping them of their heritage and their identity, right, in a strange land with a strange language and everything else, right? So they didn't have community.
Yeah.
Taking them away from their use of psychedelics, taking them away from that. Native Americans, now,
Yeah.
granted, Canada and the U.S. did some bad stuff, and they were forced into reservations, but they didn't wholly lose their culture.
Yeah.
And they go, well, you know what? They were still using psychedelics, and that's how, when you talk about shamans and different different types of spiritual leaders using psychedelics, that's how they dealt with trauma. They didn't call it trauma.
Yeah.
That's how they dealt with it. That's how they became community. And you realize when you use psychedelics, I don't know if you did, but I realized very quickly how interconnected we all are.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was after that experience where I started using the terms like we all breathe the same air.
Yep.
Because it's like we share the same space. We're
Yep.
on the same planet, and everybody's on their own individualist journeys, but we're all connected at some level.
Yeah.
We're all connected.
It's a very humbling experience.
Yeah.
And that's what cultures lost,
Yeah.
through slave trade and stuff like that. And that, there's kind of this hypothesis that, well, the First Nations people in America and Canada were able to somewhat keep their culture together
Yeah.
due to the use of psychedelics and being able to actually treat the trauma as a culture together.
Yeah.
Found that very fascinating.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's, I think, how we were meant to live.
I would agree with that.
In community, connected. They don't have depression.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure they do when people die or something like that when it's needed, right? But not like chronic depression. They're not stuck in a state of fight, flight, or freeze.
Yeah.
Didn't happen until, we started over-intellectualizing our trauma and disconnecting our
interesting.
minds from our bodies. Because that's what Freudian psychology did. It disconnected the mind from the body.
Yeah, and it placed the blame for actions on people. Yeah, like I'll never forget like the first time I heard about Freud and his like theories, and I'm like, something's just off about that.
Right. I mean, like, thank God he kind of did what he did. I mean, I'm not saying it is super cringy, some of the stuff, but it did get psychology started. But then we had men in white coats that, that were the professionals that wanted to separate the head from the body, keep it clean,
Yeah.
Let's not talk about emotion. Let's stuff it, all that stuff. And in like cognitive behavioral therapy, while it has its place, like we know now for sure that we are bottom up processors, not top down.
Oh, interesting.
Right? It's bottom up. It's our nervous system. It's our gut. It's our somatic. That is what drives our thoughts, not the other way around. That's why CBT for people, it's like, I saw a meme, a while back. It said CBT is basically just me gaslighting myself.
Yeah.
That's how it feels to me. It's not that it doesn't have its place here and there.
Yeah, because I went through DBT, and that's what changed my life.
Yeah, that's different,
Yeah.
right? That's like distress tolerance. That's like, and DBT is a really good, because there is something to, taking control of our thoughts to a point. Sure, of course. I don't let all my thoughts run wild, because if I did,
I used to.
Oh, sure. I've
Yeah.
had periods like that too.
Yeah, I remember like the one thing I learned through DBT was I literally had to tell myself no. Like every time that one of those weird empty thoughts came in there and it was negative, I just no, like I'm not having that thought right now. Like,
Right.
I need to change the way I'm thinking.
Yeah, and there's truths in that, right? That
Yeah.
are beneficial. Like for me, it's like, no, I'm not actually going to have another donut or whatever. Of course, right? Thinking through the whole consequence of everything or whatever. But, right? Like we have to still be able to tolerate our somatic and understand it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Okay.
if we can't, that's what's driving us. Right? That's what the like psychedelic therapies are doing. They're getting into that autonomic nervous system stuff.
Yeah. And changing the pathways to make it more healthy and more like in tune with yourself.
Yeah. That's why like mammals in captivity go nuts.
Yeah.
They're not nuts out in nature. They're nuts. I mean, they're nuts when we capture them or when we continue to screw around with them. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
like the poor little dolphins or whatever. Like I think it's dolphins or orcas or something. Their little fin does this, and then they'll go crazy. You know what I mean? They have PTSD. They're like stuck in fight, flight, freeze.
Well, and I just watched that show Chimp Crazy.
Oh God, I saw clips
Those poor monkeys.
right.
Those poor monkeys. Like, you're talking about going crazy. Like, you can't put an animal like that in a 10 by 10 cage and expect it to be rational and not violent. Like,
No, and they're mammals, so they
Yeah.
have fight, flight, freeze, fawn, probably, I would assume,
Yeah.
if it goes to that. And then they get wired, right? So what happens with rage? What's that? Where you just go absolutely bonkers, right? You're
Yeah.
dissociated, and that's fight.
yeah.
And you could be dissociated, right? But they're not necessarily doing that in nature.
Yeah. Yeah, you take them out of that environment and they're totally different.
Yeah, and that's like, we harm these poor mammals,
Yeah.
because we're doing it to ourselves. And I think, a lot of times as people, we're kind of coming to this reckoning. Like we talk about different world wars and things like that. I think it's just a reckoning of like, how do I want to put this, right? Like not being able to understand ourselves, what's driving us, our motivations, being able to authentically express.
And we're not taught to do that.
I know.
Like that's the one thing. From one of the things I do in my day job is I train people, and one of the things that we focus our training on is like explaining what poverty is, explaining what self-care and mental health care really
Right.
is, because it's not something that's taught.
No.
And we're sort of left to navigate these waters.
Right. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps.
Yeah, but it's impossible if you don't have boots, right? And so,
Well, you didn't work hard enough.
right, right, yeah,
And then what do we do? Like when they're expressing pain, right? I
Yeah.
don't have boots.
yeah,
Well, you should work harder.
yeah,
So what does that do to somebody?
yeah.
What does that do, right?
It internalizes the stigma, and it makes there's something wrong with you because you can't make it.
Yeah. So
when
then,
in reality,
yeah.
it's life has put circumstances in front of you that has made it impossible for you to make
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And just shifting that perspective opens up so many minds. Because
Absolutely.
like when you lead with curiosity and you lead with empathy and you can sit there and say like,
Yes.
even the worst behavior, and I have to thank Saran for telling me this, even the worst behavior out there is a condition of an unmet need. It's something in their needs that aren't getting
I
met
agree.
that causes this behavioral outburst.
Yeah.
And unless we're able to sort of take a step back and try to help people get their needs met, it's going to continue to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. No, I wholeheartedly agree. Even the most worst evil person, right? We all think of like Hitler or something.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. It's good that he's gone. I get it. However, like what was going, I am fascinated. What was going on with people like him?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, some people can just chalk it all up to like, well, he was possessed or something. And okay, maybe there's some spiritual component that I don't know about. I can't say yes or no. But, there's something happening with people, like, your previous guest said.
Yeah.
Like, I agree. It's an unmet need.
And and that impacts, because it's like, I know you're aware of this too, but the first thing to go is that for sort of prefrontal cortex, that neocortex. So all of your judgment, your ability to rationalize, all that stuff goes out the window first when you experience trauma.
It absolutely can. Yeah, that's why we forget.
Yeah.
That's why we forget.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's like our brain like disconnects from our prefrontal cortex because we can't actually comprehend what's going on.
As a safety mechanism.
Yeah. Right.
And I love the idea that there is places like this where you can use the ketamine therapy to sort of get over that hump.
Yeah.
Because sometimes that's what you need.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, it's like I see clients and it's so funny and not funny, like, haha, but clients are like, oh, you probably think I'm awful or, oh. And I'm like, look, man, and I say this and I mean this wholeheartedly, being in mental health this long has been a very humbling experience for me, and I am so much more concerned about my own shadow side. Because, I didn't get into my whole story. I gave you kind of the basis of my attachment trauma that started.
Yeah.
Right? I didn't get into all the other stuff that happened to me in my young teenage years and going into young adulthood, right? Everybody has a story, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, my own darkness or whatever, my own shadow side is so yucky.
Yeah.
I'm too busy actually worrying about that. And also, it always boils down to, like, our needs as humans they're not that complex.
Oh, I know.
We all have like the same kind of basic needs, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, your needs weren't met.
Yeah. And it's a bare minimum that we need to just exist and thrive.
It's empathy. It's empathy and attuned parents.
Yeah.
It really is. And like you're talking about being curious, stuff like that, right? Because I'll guarantee there'll be people that will watch this podcast that will get very angry about what I said around adoption. That if
100%.
If you want to piss off a giant group of people, you just say something like that around adoption instead of the curiosity, instead of looking at things. And I mean, it's like this with a lot of topics, addiction, autism. We could go into a lot of topics, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I just find it very, very much like it's hard. It's hard to get motivated to really want to heal and reconnect to yourself because then you're kind of having to learn how to deal with a whole nother set of issues. You're going to have to learn how to be rejected. You're going to have to learn how to change their baseline. And some people are going to accept you.
Yep.
And a lot aren't.
And I'm okay with that now.
Yeah. Yeah, I've learned to get more and more okay with it, right? I've still sometimes I'm like, ugh. But overall, I definitely know that sometimes I have to do and say hard things, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And I'm much more okay with it now.
And I don't even think it's saying hard things. I think it's setting yourself up with boundaries to keep yourself
100%
healthy.
I
and
love
safe.
that. You're right. I agree.
Because I don't really, one of the things I always recommend, like if you have somebody who's on the autism spectrum and you want to have a very emotionally charged conversation, I always recommend 2 weeks before you have that conversation, you let the person know that you want to have the conversation. And then you give them a date to where you're going to have the conversation. Yeah. And then you give them 2 weeks to prepare to have that conversation. And just that little shift will produce so many powerful results for your neurodivergent friends or loved ones.
Yeah, I would love to have known this as a parent.
Yeah.
There's so much around parenting now that I'm like, I didn't know, Yeah. And I know I do think most parents do the best job they can.
Oh, 100%.
Most,
100%.
But yeah, it's really good. That's a really good way to put it. And think of like our public schools don't do that. Like we just don't.
No.
I didn't do it as a parent.
And the problem that's frustrating from my perspective on that perspective is that you're forcing the person with a disability to change the way they think and the way their brain works.
And they can't without dire consequences,
Right.
without disconnecting from themselves,
Right.
and then ending up doing ketamine, right? I mean, you know.
Yeah. And so instead of clinicians sort of having that approach and taking that approach, as even that's a bare minimum of an accommodation. As a doctor, I would love to see that as a bare minimum, just an accommodation for somebody with neurodivergent disability, and how much that will change medicine if you could have doctors do that piece.
Absolutely. But it's trauma-informed, medical professionals. And, I mean, I'm a clinical supervisor. I work a lot with people, who are getting their client hours so they can get licensed, as mental health providers. And I work with countertransference. That's my big, what I work with, right? Because we're all going to have it, good and bad, from clients and people, right? And not being afraid of it and leaning into it.
Yeah.
And understanding it, what it's telling us, right? Because I was a baby clinician at one point too, and I was the same kind of way, where I didn't know, I just didn't know.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get head knowledge, but you got to get the experience.
Well, and I'll throw this out there too, like if you ever want somebody who's neurodivergent to answer questions from your newbie clinicians, I'm always available to do that kind of stuff.
I would love that. Yeah. I think neurodivergence is you just don't know. And it's like we're learning more and more and more.
And the stereotypes and the myths that are out there because what people see on TV. Because like Love on the Spectrum, right?
Right.
I love the show for what it is.
Yeah, it's a cute show.
But the people on that show are curated to fit a mold that the producers want to fit, and you see a very singular subset of people.
Right,
on
or
the
Rain
spectrum.
Man.
Yeah,
I love that one, the Rain Man.
Yeah. If I had $1 for every time somebody told me I don't look autistic, like I'd be a wealthy man. Yeah, I get it all the time. You don't look autistic. I don't know what that means, but
Oh, well, yeah, right, exactly. But that's what. God, it's like that for so many things instead of like you're talking like just being curious and empathetic and listening.
Yeah. And it's just that step. That's really, yeah.
We just don't look autistic, Sullivan.
Right?
I mean, I feel like you do with your shirt though.
Yeah. Well, I now that I wear it on my sleeve, I wear it like a badge of honor.
Yeah, good for you.
And I do like I'm not lost on how many lives I've changed.
That's so amazing.
Because I'm out there and vocal about it.
Good. Well, I love this era. So the thing is, like, there was a point in time I was kind of annoyed because it seemed like everybody had ADHD and everybody wanted to have ADHD. And I'm like, you don't understand what that was like for me growing up.
No.
Or being, whatever. And I was kind of in this annoyed phase for a little while, and I had to work through it. And the annoyance was just kind of like my own stuff I had to work through of like, I was raised in a time when it was not good. I think I was in 4th grade when the teacher pulled my parents aside and said, like, have you thought about meds? And like, I like now the here and now because people are embracing this.
Yes.
They're embracing it, and it's not so weird, creepy, like weird in a bad way.
Yeah.
I like weird in a good way.
100%.
Weird in a bad way.
Yeah.
And like, I'm starting to be like, wow, this is actually kind of cool. Like I'll, be on TikTok or something, and I'll see, just people being themselves, expressing authentically.
Yeah.
And it, they're more in the creative than they are the linear side of things. Right. We need creatives in life.
Yeah.
And that's what I think a lot, not all, but a lot of neurodivergent people are just like, with your shirt and your podcast, right? This is a very creative, out of the box way to do things.
Yeah, and I love every minute of it. Like I get to have interviews like this, like I never thought possible. Like,
you get to know people. You're bringing community together. Well,
and we get to have real conversations, right? Because like even with like a place like this, right? There's so many misconceptions, and there's so many like really uninformed people out there who see ketamine therapy. And then all of these negative attachments, it's like, no, if you take a step back and like look at really having this conversation, you'll understand like, no, this is needed.
Right.
It's needed.
Right. Exactly. It's needed. So I had to look at my watch. It was like, normally I'm pretty good at keeping track of time just because there's like a clinical hour that's been like lodged into my psyche. But I've been so involved in this conversation, I'm like losing track. I've lost track of time. But yeah, absolutely. And so now I look at myself as like, really, as far as my identity, right? I've been gifted with the ability as a healer.
Yeah.
Right? That, and music too, that's a different thing, although they can overlap. But, as a healer, that means that I need healing too.
Yeah.
And I'm not ashamed to admit that. And I'm not ashamed to admit that, hey, I'm messed up. I do, I'm human. But, it's really an honoring place to be.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like, I don't want to sound all, weird about it, but like, it's kind of the shamanist spirit, if you will. Right? I want, like you, I think what you're doing is healing in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah. We want to make things better for ourselves and others.
Yeah.
And I deeply, and when I think about my own identity, that's really what I've always wanted. And that wasn't understood nor well received when I was a young person.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
It was often misconstrued.
And the driving force behind me today is remembering what I've had to go through. And I don't want anybody else to have to go through what I went through to get where I'm at. Like anything I can do to make the pathway to success a little bit easier for people with disabilities, I'm going to do it.
Sure.
I'm going to sacrifice myself. I'm going to advocate. I'm going to do whatever's necessary because I think everybody deserves a fair shot in this life.
Yeah.
And everybody should be able to just be their authentic selves.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I can't sacrifice in those ways, meaning like I do sacrifice. It's not that I don't. It's that like I actually have to be able to pull back too because I get, I got to be careful and have my boundaries. But yes, 100%. It's like as healers in the community, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Like we got to have each other's backs.
100%.
Yeah. We gotta, because you just don't meet people like this every day. It sound like I just hate people, but.
But I get what you're saying, though.
Yeah, 100%. I don't.
Yeah. Because it takes effort to curate people who are kind and want this world to be a better place.
Yeah.
They're kind of hard to find sometimes.
I think it's hard to find people that can be really vulnerable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like really vulnerable.
Well, and I always viewed being vulnerable as a superpower. And not everybody has it.
Yeah.
Because if you're willing to put your butt on the line and openly talk about, things like I talk about addiction and mental health and all this stuff, like it leads other people to be able and have permission to have these conversations because we're told we're not supposed to.
Right.
And that's not healthy, I don't think.
No, it's not. It's shaming. Because one thing about shame, I just saw something in the window. It looks like they're cleaning outside.
Something like that, yeah.
One thing about shame is it's the felt sense, not the logical, but the felt sense of being disconnected.
Yeah.
Or not deserving connection.
Yeah.
So we know that little children can feel shame, I think as young as like 1.5, 18 months, something like that.
Interesting.
So shame is the felt sense, right? So it's not logical, right? That's more guilt or maybe false guilt. But like shame is this dysregulating experience of I'm bad, and I don't deserve to be connected, and it's a disconnected experience, right? And if we get too shamed, we can get disconnected from ourselves. Because connecting to yourself is what? Bad.
Yeah.
You're bad. Don't connect. You know what I mean?
I have a lot to ponder now.
Yeah, psychedelics will do that for you.
Yeah. So we've been at this for a while.
Okay.
I think we can stick a fork in this one.
We sure can. Although I never did I'm going to actually just cheat really quick.
Yeah, please.
I've got to get back to the difference between psychedelics and dissociative because it's killing me. I know the answer, but it's...
don't let me leave without taking a selfie together.
Oh, okay. Absolutely. I love it. The difference between, right, dissociatives and psychedelic. There we go. Yeah, okay, here we go. We're going to see with what the AI Google says. Dissociative and psychedelics are both types of hallucinogenics, but they differ significantly in their mechanisms of actions and effort. Dissociatives like ketamine and PCP primarily affect the NMDA receptor in the brain, leading to a sense of detachment or dissociation from reality, while psychedelics like psilocybin and LSD primarily act on serotonin receptors. Right, okay, that's what it is, producing altered perceptions and heightened sensory experiences.
So you're still associating, you're still having the connection with yourself. It's just altering the pathways within it, and then the disassociation, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're actually separating, the chemical itself allows you to separate and look at your life from a different
Well,
way.
they both do. They both take us out of the default mode network.
Okay.
That's what's cool about it.
Yeah.
And so when we're out of our default mode network, which I know we're at the time, so we can't get into that.
Yeah.
That's the magic of the healing. Getting out of the default mode network and recognizing, I can do something.
You're good.
I can do things differently. I can forgive my father
Yeah.
because you went outside your default mode network.
Yeah.
And ketamine does that as well.
And so how do people get for more information about impact behavioral?
Oh yeah, so we're on Facebook and Instagram under Impact Behavioral Health in Salem, Oregon, or impactbehavioralhealthllc.com. And our website is right now in the process of being updated, so don't be too judgy.
Right. And so, like, if you're going to go through and become a client and go through the ketamine experience, you're looking at like a 4 to 6 week process.
Yeah, ish. It just depends if you have your own prescriber. We have prescribers here that
Okay.
people can see, but you're going to be looking at, if you have insurance, like private insurance, you're going to be looking still at having to pay some cash.
Okay.
You know, but yeah, but you know, people are more than welcome to. I mean, really, when they call or they send an email, it usually goes to me anyway. So
Yeah.
I'm going to be the one, you know, answering the questions. But yeah, you're going to be looking at some cash pay, and it's going to be time. You know, it's going to be an investment into their health.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's got to be a bit of a commitment.
On both ends.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I will show up. If that's the thing with me, right? You're talking about you want to advocate for people and you don't want them to go down that path, right? And you
Yeah.
have that passion. For me, it's like this. Look, if people are invested in their healing at 100%, I'm invested in their healing at 100%. Do you know what I mean? I'm going
Yeah.
to show up and do my work. So,
Well, Cynthia, thank you so
yeah,
much.
thank you, Sullivan. I appreciate you reaching out.
And be kind, y'all. Like I said before, we all share the same air. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. That was awesome.